So welcome everyone to our first talk of the fall. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Michael Lewis. You see some of Michael's titles up there. Michael's University Distinguished Professor of Pediatrics and Psychiatry, and he's Director of the Institute for the Study of Child Development at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. He's also a Professor of Psychology, Education, and Biomedical Engineering, and he's a co-founder of the founding director of the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School Autism Center. And his most prestigious accomplishment, of course, is that he's a member of the RuCCS Executive Committee. He's written and edited over 40 books, and I counted them, so it's true, which have been translated in other languages, including German, Italian, Polish, Russian, Danish, Japanese, and Portuguese. And he's now working on a book, it may be done now, entitled Lying and Deception in Everyday Life. And that's the title of his talk today. So, thank you, Michael.
On such an afternoon, we should have some fun. And we should do that also because on Thursday, they're going to take out my natural knee and put in some device. So this is So Long for a While song. But I do want to talk about lying and deception in everyday life. And I want to place it in the context, the broadest context I can, of the last 55 years of research and thinking interest, which is really about consciousness. And some of you may know I've tried to measure it, not only define it, but try to measure it. What an impossible task. But in any event, lying and deception comes out of this, and so do illusions, so does hypnotism. So there are many entrances into what I want to talk about, which has to do with the self, and the self in relation to other selves, and what might we know about it. So let me start off by saying, since I am going to take a position, and it might be favorable to some of you, it might not be favorable to others. It certainly was not favorable to my mother, my first wife, mother of my children, who thought I was a psychopath, because we're going to border on that topic as well as we move along. So the proposition I'm going to offer, quite simply, is that lying and deception are natural occurring human behavior that occur with very high frequency, and that they serve a very useful purpose. And having made that statement, I would add : Trump gives lying a bad name. But I want to come back to that, because that indeed is, we could use as an epitome of someone who doesn't know how to tell the truth, lies. We don't even know if he knows he's lying, or changing his story and so on. So as you can see, do you know if you're lying? Does that make any sense? And if, can you know you're lying? And how would you measure it? What's the difference? What might they be? So I'm going to talk about lying and deception. And I want to get in to some of the things it touches upon, at least in my way of thinking of the world. First of all, lying and deception. Oh, I'm going to have a slide to say it. I don't want to keep using lying and deception. And lying and deception are often the same thing, but lying is much more pejorative than deception. So if I said, you've been deceptive, you would be less offended than if I said you were lying. So why our language, other languages make this distinction, I have no idea. But I'm going to try to talk about lying if I can get myself to do it. So lying requires that something external sets of behaviors and internal sets don't match. And we've known this in studying emotion, that emotional states and emotional expressions can be detached. They are not firmly bound. So lying and deception speaks to emotions and to the expression of emotions, real or otherwise. The theory of mind obviously comes to mind when you're thinking, especially in young children, about the idea, well, they're lying. Do they know that the other knows they're lying? So you're going to get into self-other, and that's development. Deception as a property of social life is just a natural reality. You ask me, how am I? And I now tell you about the terrible knee I've had and what I've gone through in the last 2 years, and you will look at me and say, who asked you? When you simply ask, how are you? Yeah, so it's a pleasantry, and one needs, in fact, to learn that they're not asking. In the same way you got to learn the language, you've got to learn that that's not a question to really be answered. Cultural and historical differences. Well, that's really amusing. I'm old enough to remember when the price on the item was not the price you would pay. You would say, yeah, I know, but how much really do you want? And you enter into a barter system where you're both lying continuously and organizing the lie to make a sale. And by the way, those of you who don't know much about bargaining, let me tell you, you can't offer as against the asked for price an absurd price, because then you've broken it. The rule is we're going to stay within some boundary yet to be determined, yet you know if you've gone outside that boundary because it ends the barter. So, George Washington. Now, what country, and now we're going to get to a culture because I think we have some uniqueness here. What culture has its founding father, the general leading the revolution, and you only know one thing about George Washington and his childhood, which is he didn't lie. Okay? I did Dad cut down the cherry tree. Like if you tell the truth, you end up being president. I mean, it's a joke. Actually, it would make a wonderful editorial or letter to the editor, George Washington and Trump. So we have this fixation. I mean, these are what school children are taught. These are what are in textbooks, that the hero of the revolution, we don't call it a revolution, but the hero of the revolution was, in fact, only told the truth. Now, that's probably as far from the truth as possible. You don't get to be the hero of a revolution by telling the truth. Any event, the last that we could touch upon are issues of morality and interpersonal. Etiquette. When I grew up, etiquette, you needed to know the rules of etiquette. I mean, it was part of something you learned in the middle class, in the northeast part of the United States in 1912. No, it's a little, but uh, the, what, do you bring something to someone's house as a gift if you go to someone's house? Most people do, I assume most of us do. Well, that's an etiquette. It was just a rule made up, and you simply knew what to do when you go to visit. Okay? Etiquette has disappeared. In its place, we have authenticity. The aim on my relationship with you is to be as honest as we can. It's a rebellion against, of course, deception or lying. It's being authentic, this idea of authenticity. In fact, Trump won the election because he was the most authentic of the characters in place. He told it as it was. He said, yeah, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and you'd still vote for me. Well, somebody tells you this, he's really authentic. That he's an authentic something is irrelevant. Authenticity. Hillary was not authentic. The other person who could have beaten him, I think, on authenticity was Sanders, who was authentic. So authenticity is extraordinarily important. Lying and deception are really bad things in interpersonal life. And I'll tell you one more story. This is like cocktail hour. One more story. Eisenhower and Khrushchev have finally decided that they would start meeting. Okay, the Cold War's at its height. It's really, the atomic scientist clock is almost at midnight. And they plan to meet, and right before the meeting, Gary Powers in the U-2 flies over, spying on Russia, and he crashes, and the press say to Eisenhower, well, did you know about this? So he has a choice of saying, it's a big government, I don't know everything, I didn't know about it. Or he could say, I know about it. What would Khrushchev's move be if Eisenhower said, I knew about it? The day before you were coming, I was spying on you. He wouldn't come. When Eisenhower, in fact, told the truth and said he knew it, it terminated their meeting, and it never occurred. It may have occurred later, but it was stopped. So, what am I getting at? I'm hinting around that maybe some deception, some lying has some benefit. And indeed, that's what I'm going to try to demonstrate in a series of experiments that I've done and my colleagues and students have done, as well as other people have done in the area. It's not an extensive area, interestingly enough. There's, I'm going to try to say, it is important to know that, calling someone a liar, the American Western, where you had Gary Cooper unwind his linky body and say, did you call me a liar? These are fighting words to call someone a liar, but to say you're deceptive is not. So lying really brings home the power, and it is a moral dilemma. Okay, I'm going to talk about 4 kinds of lying. The first is lying to protect the feelings of others. This is the most acceptable form, although purists who have a moral position simply say, you have to tell it as it is. So you can simply, your colleague can say, gee, I want you to read the paper, give me your opinion, and you find out they've already sent it off to to a journal. So Do you tell him your opinion, or do you not? Can't change it. He sent it off. So the little white lie occurs just all the time. It's just it's a baseline. I don't like the fact that we call it a white lie, but I have to say in other languages it's also called. It has a white connotation to it. So I don't know if light skin lies versus dark, heavy lies. But okay, so little white lies, we agree that we might agree as well that when your grandmother was knitting your child a sweater for Christmas, and that the child expected a toy, and that the sweater is an ugly color and out of style, that you would expect your child, with good manners, to say, "Oh, thank you, Grandma, that's really lovely, I like it," and not use it. You would, in fact, instruct the child to do that. If the child, in fact, said, "Hey, under the general rule, okay, you're learning a grammar and social behavior, you've got a general rule, tell the truth." That's very important for parents, by the way, telling the truth, because for different reasons now. It was originally so you could exert control. That is, you know what's going on. But we now accept it's in bad taste to hurt people's feelings. But we would have a disagreement. I'm sure there are folks in the audience, perhaps, who would say, no, the good thing to do for the relationship, for the helping of this person, is to tell the truth, tell it as I would if I were an anonymous reviewer, for example, which we give permission to really tell it as it is. Okay, lying to avoid punishment. Situation, you're walking in farmland in a strange country, and you're hungry and thirsty, and then there's an apple on the ground, and you pick it up and you eat it, and then someone comes over to you and says, did you eat the apple? And you know, in this country, they will cut off your hand if, in fact, you say you stole it and eaten it. That's the punishment. Anyone would tell the truth? Would anyone under such condition tell the truth? No, because there's some protection of oneself that seems to have some fundamental place in our life. So we're going to talk about a lying to avoid punishment, and I've got lots of data and studies to show you what will be the premise coming up. Lying to the self-deception. Well, that's an extraordinary area of inquiry. Do we, when we have learned imitation or learned certain complex level of play, where you now pretend that object is some other object. So the pencil becomes the propeller of a helicopter. So now what you have is, at the same time, you know it's this, that is, your fantasy is it's this, and you can be tested, your reality, you know it's not it, but you still believe it. And we have loads of examples of this people in people's lives. The one I like best is the one that has to do with me standing. There's a lake I swim in, and it's very cold. And I go to the edge, and I try to go in, and I can't go in. And so to force myself to go in, I say, when I count to 3, I will go in. I'm doing the counting, and yet I jump in at the count of 3 where I couldn't jump in before. I separate, I mean, there's a complex set of cells running around there where suddenly a voice, your own, can command you to do something which you couldn't do without the voice. So this whole self-deception, lying to oneself, can take you into the clinical domain. It brings you anywhere. In medicine, an enormous amount of self-deception, as well as deception of others, takes place as a natural occurrence. You know, doc, is it bad? Well, it's not good, but it's not so bad. Could be so bad. You're usually not given the figures, the numbers, and so on. So you're relying on someone, and then the social behavior comes into play, namely, try not to hurt the person's feelings. And until recently, that was a dominant theme in medicine. Now they've been sued enough, so now they have to tell the truth. And now they're in a situation where then they have to deal with telling the truth. Well, they didn't go to medical school to learn how to deal with the truth. They learned how to treat a patient, and part of treating a patient is to give them some hope or whatever else you want to do. And part of that requires, you can't say, well, only 1% survive. So, but, you know, you could be that 1%. Actually, it would work, since people gamble with low. So, there are these three kinds of lying, and we could find some justification in each of them. The pathological lie is of particular interest, and that's my statement that Trump gives lying a bad name. It's not lying in the service of avoiding punishment, protecting the feeling of the self and the other. It is, in fact, around some kind of psychic gain, and it seems to be the most pathological. And indeed, if we have the time and inclination, we can talk about narcissism, and right now the cultural roles, which include telling it as it is. I'll give you a perfect example. The mothers of the children we studied sometimes watch their children lying, and they get very upset. So we have to develop a way to speak to them, to tell them, listen, it's actually that he lied is good. He's going to have a higher IQ if he lies. So it's good to do. But you get moms telling stories like the child comes home with another toy of another child in a play date. The mom asks the child, where'd you get it? The child says, they gave it to me. And then the mother finds out with a phone call that in fact the child has taken it. And the mother's response is not around a moral proposition. It's around, you lied to me. And she will punish the child first and foremost for the lying part, rather than the moral rule being violated. Okay, so protecting the feelings of others. Obviously, you learn it directly, and you learn it that the parent literally says it to children. It's not any work of ours, but people have studied it, and in fact studied where if the parent says it's okay to lie, the small percentage of children who do tell the truth anyway disappear. They have permission to lie from their parents, and they tell the truth. So people looking at this have found, in fact, that parents easily can influence their children to lie through suggesting they do it. It's not anything that we've done. The other one is imitation, which hasn't been studied at all. You say, gee, I really don't want Bob to come over, I'm tired, and you're saying this to your kid, and Bob walks in, and you say, "Hi, Bob, I'm so glad to see you." Okay? The child, through imitation. That is, lying occurs frequently enough that they can observe that in fact they start to learn the rule through imitation that lying is a class of behaviors which people use. The issue of lying to protect the feelings of others actually impinges upon this whole theme now being developed, Mike Tomasella and DeWall, on that morality, somehow a moral sense, is part of the baggage that the child comes with. And in fact, these are the children who help others in distress. These are the children whose perception goes toward the character that has been helpful rather than the character who has been unhelpful. This idea of morality as somehow a biological, something built into the species in behavior toward one another, carries with it the idea that these are wonderful little people going about helping others as best they can, and the idea that lying doesn't fit with that morality story. That story of the helper of others is not the liar. It's a counter story. But lying to protect the feelings of others has been studied. There are two experimental paradigms. The first is the child is offered to choose between an attractive variety of toys that it will get once the child plays some game with the experimenter. And then the child picks out one, and then the child, the game is played with the child, and then the experimenter reaches into a box to get the toy that the child chose and finds there are no toys left. The model of it is down on a cardboard, so you couldn't take that one. So the person says, "I'm sorry, I don't have any more," and says that I couldn't go to the store to get more because someone was sick or I fell down or some kind of thing. And now you want to see what the child's expression is not getting the toy that they thought they were going to get. The second paradigm is a kind of an interesting one. It's a take, and they observe facial expression. So using the elaborate coding systems that are developed, you can look to see, does the child smile? Is it a false smile? Is it a true smile? Does the child frown? Does the child show anger? And so you can score the children on this. The second paradigm is one we might be familiar with. How many times have you seen a lint or a spot or something on someone's clothes that you're talking to, and your impulse would be to take it off, or something on the corner of their face, a little, piece of cupcake that got stuck there at lunch. But there is an impulse to do something about it. We constrain ourselves because somehow it's inappropriate. So the idea was, what do very young children do in this situation? Except they put a mark on their nose and the person is now going to go have their picture taken. Okay, and the picture taken is very important. Will the child say anything? Say, "Hey, you got a thing, get it off before you have your picture taken." That's sort of the challenge. So these are the child's verbal response and facial expression. And there are enough of these kinds of studies around to show. Okay, so I have the data on it. Let me just go forward some more. Here it is, I'm sorry. Okay, so in the first paradigm, By 4 years of age, children master facial expressions. By 4. Girls are better at it than boys. And that's generally the case. I don't know if this is familiar or not, but if you go to a restaurant and there's bad service, it's usually the man who's going to make a complaint, and it's usually the woman who says, characteristically so, it's usually the woman who says, it's okay, it's not his fault, it's not the waiter, don't yell at the waiter, and so on. So the women's attention to the feelings of others across the board, and study after study show a female preference for that. In the second paradigm, children say the experimenter looks okay for the photograph by 3 years of age. That is 89% don't say that the experimenter has a spot on their nose. So only a small percentage would say, hey, could you get that crumb spot off your face? Okay? And we know that it's an ambivalent situation for us as well. You have to know the person very well, and even then, there would be conditions that you might not want to do it. Okay. So, self-deception. There's absolutely no data on self-deception, and I've made the argument that pretend play may be the precursor. If you look at pretend play, certainly by 24 months, the children there is a self-deception going on. That is, they can play with something that they know are blocks, and at the same time know it's the tower of a castle. They know it at the same time. And depending on how we would ask them, we could get out either answer. It's just a function, but you can do that. So if self-deception is going to emerge, certainly the precursors of it in some form seem to be in place by then. Let me go on. Okay, so this is the work that we worked on. We wanted to work on lying to avoid punishment. And you have to understand lying to avoid punishment is also, what's the expression? Be a man, confess, own up to it. We have lots of terms in our language to try to convince people that the better thing is to lie. Now, it turns out that's really silly, because it turns out it's not. Parents do crazy things. So if something is broken and the two kids were playing, the mom will now do what the Nazis did in the Second World War. They will say, well, if one of you doesn't confess, I'll punish you both. So this was the moral lesson that is being taught to, and the kid goes, oh, I won't punish you for breaking the lamp, I'll punish you for lying. I mean, there are a variety of techniques which you get children to try to tell the truth when in fact they don't, because what we will see, so what do we do? We put a kid in a room, the kid is facing, well, we have cameras, so there are cameras on the child, but the child can't see they're being photographed. The experimenter takes out of a box a big sounding toy and is setting it up behind the child on a table, all the while saying to the child, don't look, we're going to play with it, let me set it up, don't look. She sets the toy up, she then says to the child, I have to go out of the room for a little bit. Remember, don't look, and she walks out. And now we can time how long it takes the child to look, okay? So it's an old, impulse control, inhibitory kind of measure, okay? I just read about the marshmallow test not being replicable. It's an example of that. kind of idea. In any event, the experimenter stays out for 5 minutes or until the child looks, and then comes back into the room and says, looking at the child, first just looking, and then saying, did you peek? So we have the look, and then we have the question. And we can measure the facial expression of the child and the verbal response. So we're going to talk about that paradigm, which we've used in many different ways now. The interesting thing is that, let me go to it, I probably have it here. Oh, there's the pathological line. So you see it's been around a long time, and just back up. It's not a type of lie, it's a personality type. And these are what, back in the beginning of the 20th century, was written about it. Personalities need to exaggerate, lie, blame, overstate their achievements and success, and failures are blamed on others or denied. Sounds familiar. And we now think of it in terms of narcissistic disorder. This complex is really narcissism. But let me go back to here where I should be. Well, the point is that the pathological lying is in fact what gets the rest of lying a bad name. Okay, let me show you the phenomena. That's what I was going to do. Show you how it looks. Okay, here we go. Come on. Wait, okay. Okay. Person leaves the room, and sometimes they look as the person's back is to them leaving the room. Those are really the no latency. We leave them up to 5 minutes alone in the room, and there are many children who don't look for 5 minutes with nothing else to do. Okay, let me show you a long, next one, a longer latency. So she's set up in this. No, these are terrible. They're too dark. But no, she look. So we have cameras back. We can tell. So we know whether they're telling the truth or not. So we have two different measures on them. The first measure is how long does it take for them to peak? Now, we know from that literature that the longer you take, the better you are. You know, whatever you want to measure, it's going to be on the good side of it than on the bad side. Now, the real question is, where does lying come in? Is it on the good side, along with long latencies? Well, I wouldn't be presenting the way I am if, in fact, it did. It turns out just the opposite. That all the good things that go with long latencies go with lying rather than truth-telling. So let me go on. Okay, here is a child admitting that they had peaked when they're asked. I don't have the sound on, but he admits to it. Okay, and here's a child. They're being asked the question now. That's the snippet. Looked at and asked the question. Now you get an interesting, in the very young children, you get, which is probably in older people as well, you get this, I didn't hear the question. Well, you know, you don't respond at all. which is a very good thing if you don't want to lie, but you don't want to tell the truth. So it's sort of not answering. We sort of moved it into the not telling the truth. Okay, so as I've said, poor self-control, lying about one's misdeeds are bad, hence lead less confidence, lying less confidence. Poor self-control is bad, but lying about one's misdeed is adaptive, and you should get it this way. So that's what the data are going to look. So let me just show you, these are many studies and hundreds of kids, so, and it's all published, so somewhere in here I have it. So we're going to look at peaking first, the qualities of peaking. And at 2 years of age, almost all children peak in this task. However, by 6 years of age, as you can see, that you have gained some self-control, and the majority aren't peaking. And by the way, that percentage seems, if you start looking at older children, it hangs around the 30%. You can do it with students. You say, you know, I've graded your paper, I want to talk to you about it. I put it down on the desk, turn it over, say, listen, I have to go to the bathroom, be right back. Don't look at it until, and then you walk out and you photograph whether they look at it and then ask them. And you probably get the percentages similar to 6-year-olds. So, okay, that's just an average, that's not interesting. Let's look at sex and peaking. These are percentage who peaked, and the males peak more than the females, which is generally found, whether we like it or not. Females are more rule-oriented, at least at this age, than are the male children. How about IQ and peaking? Just what you would think. Those who peaked, I've got it, yeah. So there you have it. So the higher the IQ, the less likely the kids were to peak. A simple number of kids. And you can see that children with below 100 are much more likely to peak than children above. So again, IQ should go with delay of gratification. Family environmental risk. This is just to say that it's made up of a composite score, and it tries to get at, is this social class would account for a lot of this. If you have enough diversity in your samples, you can use this. High-risk kids are more likely to peak, is defined by those family variables, than are low-risk kids. No different than what you get in any of the differences on delay of gratification, or selecting the small amount early and delaying the large amount. You get social class differences. It just goes to show that this test, this experiment, in fact gets at these variables likewise. We looked at emotional knowledge, which was measures of social emotional maturity, understanding emotional information, and includes ability to decode, recognize, and reproduce emotional information. I won't go into it. It's a procedure that we've made up. It seems to work. And you can look at these three situations, and the non-peakers in fact show greater, and if you look at a total score, the non-peakers do better than the peakers, which again is good things. A neonatal risk. If you look at birth trauma, birth condition, you find the same thing, namely that the peakers have a higher, come from backgrounds of higher of not only environment, but neonatal and medical risk. So, okay, now, so here are just some of the data to simply say that those who don't peak have more of all these things which we think are good for children to have. Now, differences in lying. So now we're going to look at their lying behavior. The mean age in months of the liars are older because, here's a better slide for it. It should be percent percent who lie. So at 2 years of age, you only have about 35% of the kids who lie. But there's a rapid increase in the 3 and 4-year-olds, and that's significant from the 2, and the 5 and 6 are significantly different from the 3 and 4. So with increasing age, children lie. Almost all of them turn out to lie. And this sort of maps out. Interestingly, there are no sex differences in whether children, males or females, tell the truth or lie. So they're just, these are 2 separate studies. There are about 100 kids in each study. This is the one I like. I'll show it to you this way first. If your IQ is lower than 80, more than 85% lie. However, as your IQ goes up to greater to 120, 100%. So most of the kids are lying, regardless of what their IQ is. But many more of them do it at older ages. And then I can go back and...
Question?
Yeah.
Are you looking at the lying only of those who peaked?
Yes. Now, there could be 2 kinds of lies. So thank you for asking that. Because one lie is they lied, they didn't peak, and they did. But the other lie is that they did peak and they didn't. It occurs, but so infrequent that one doesn't need it. So these are people who peaked and whether they lie. We can compare 3 groups. Those who told the truth, those who lied, all of them having peaked, versus a group that hasn't peaked. So on IQ, our comparison is with that, and it turns out that of those who peak and lie have a higher IQ than those who don't peak by about 10 IQ points. It's quite significant, but it's almost a standard, well, 2/3 of a standard deviation above. So, but the comparison, you have to have 3 comparisons. Those who don't peak, therefore, don't lie when they say they didn't, and those who peaked, who lied and told the truth. So you're working with 3 groups. I can show that more clearly. Okay, lying. Again, here you can see in the IQ. Percent who lied, higher IQ, they're lying. I said that before. Let's go to the next. Emotional knowledge. Just as significant as IQ, the liars have more emotional knowledge than the truth tellers. They know more about emotions, their display, the context in which they occur, Yeah,
Would you say this relates to the idea of theory of mind a little bit? Is
I'm
that-
sorry, say it
The
again.
idea of theory of mind, is that captured in
Yeah,
this
we didn't
literature?
do theory of mind, but
It's
other studies
related.
have done theory of mind, and indeed it's correlated, significantly related to children who have a theory of mind will in fact do more lying than those who don't. So that would make sense. But a theory of mind and IQ also are correlated. IQ, if you want to deal with it, just sucks up all the variance. And so it often, you say the groups are equal or something, but you certainly don't want to look at the variance around IQ versus some independent measure. It just takes it all. Anyway, emotional knowledge and lying, oh, these are the different kinds. Okay, so let's look at some things. Peaking is related to being younger, being a boy, having lower IQ, being from a higher environmental risk, and having poor emotional knowledge, and moreover, having some neonatal risk and birth complications. Here are some of the other studies. There are more now, and especially Kang Lee and Victoria Talwa, two Toronto psychologists, have been doing a lot of this work, sort of filling in some of these things. But now let's look at lying. Lying is related to older, being a girl, higher IQ, low environmental risk, good emotional knowledge, and less neonatal. So in fact, they're the opposite. Yes, we've replicated in these group of kids that findings that say a delay of gratification is associated with a constellation of characteristics, traits, measures, however we want to conceptualize, that we think of as a positive. Whereas lying is also related, is the converse. Whatever was good, those are the factors which would, in fact, predispose you to lie as well. Now, how about the ability to detect? Because I've given you the verbal response, and in fact, one of the really painstaking tasks is to score facial expression, which just eats up everyone's life and all your grant money and everything else, because it's endless. In any event, so let's get at that domain. Maybe they know to lie, but maybe they're not very good at it. Now, let me tell you something. There is no lie detector test. Whatever they may say in a headline, you cannot detect lying up to now. Whether you're looking at brain connectivity, whether you're looking at body posture, facial expression, it was always believed that they were detectable. And Ekman, Paul, who was one of the chief pioneers in developing the coding system, he believed that this coding system couldn't be faked. You couldn't deceive or lie facially. But of course we know that's not true. And it turns out the same kinds of things that inform us about what they say also informs us. We know how to mask our emotion. We know that if we're going in for a raise to the chair of the department or the dean, and the dean says, let me tell you a joke, and tells you a joke, it's probably in your interest to smile, maybe even laugh, and to do it well, okay? And so that's a skill, and we know it. And so that in fact, we should find facial expression as we do, as most people do. Facial expression is not the answer. You cannot detect it, and children get good at it and get good at it very early. Now, if you want to think of a complex psychological, motor, affect, physiological system, coordination. These kids at 3 years of age, you can't detect it. I'm going to give you some of the data. You just can't detect that they're lying or not, okay? And that's why parents quickly resort to, I won't punish you if you did it, but I'll punish you if you lie, because they can't tell. And the funny thing is that a colleague worked with together on this, she said she was a very moral person and religious person. And she said, I know my daughter wouldn't lie to me. And I just sort of, okay, well, maybe. So what's wrong with her? She came in one day and she said, oh, Michael, you're right. She gave her child a pill because the child had a fever or something. The child put the pill in the mouth. She drank some water. Mom said, you swallow it? She said, yes. And then an hour later, when the kid wasn't in the room, she looked in the wastebasket and there was the pill. And that she was now convinced that, in fact, even her daughter could mask it. So, okay. So we're going to look at the ability to detect. Okay. So what we do is we take the tapes that we've made of the kids, and we take 58 children's videotape statements are chosen on no, I did not peek. Okay, so they said no, they didn't. And now you have two groups. 45 were lying, they had peeked, and 13 were telling the truth. So now we have 64 adult raters are shown these videotape segments and rate the child's honesty. Okay? As you can see, 0.5 would be sort of a chance. They're doing really terrible at it. Okay? You cannot detect. Well, I have much more data. I can break it down this. Okay, the child lied, and the rater said the child lied. That's 41%. The raters who said that the child told the truth were 33, and 25 couldn't tell. So, in fact, more said the child lied than said the truth under the condition that the child lied. And the child told the truth, they detected 50. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it makes no sense in detection theory. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just, they can't do it. It's a task that they just can't do. They try to do it, but the data aren't terribly good. Now we looked at sex differences, men and women, and we found no difference in men and women's ability to detect. We had mostly non-parents, and we had some parents, and of course it's rather small, but indeed no difference between having a kid and not. That you didn't learn something about kids by having kids. Namely, they're going to lie to you. You're not going to readily detect it. By the way, there are good lies and bad lies. Okay? Good lies and bad lies. We could come back to the course on lying, but there are good lies and bad lies. Good lie is that it is, well, actually, it's wonderful. I won't get into it. There are good lies and bad lies. So if I'm dating and I'm speaking to a woman on the phone and I say, look for a 6'5" man with white hair and a beard, a white beard, that's a bad lie because she's not going to find me because I'm not 6'5". So if you're going to lie, you have to lie so as to be reasonable lie. I'll go into it later. Okay, the parent status, we couldn't find anything. There are not a lot of studies on this. There's not a lot of data. There's enough of data on adults and on children now to say it's not detectable when they're lying. It's not. There's a wonderful classical study in which nurses are told, we're going to show you disgusting wounds and stuff, and you have to mask your facial expression, because if you had a patient with this, you don't want to have a terrible disgust face when you're treating them. So the one study on this that's been done is you present slides of regular pleasant scenes and of these disgust-like scenes, and a rater who doesn't know what's being shown rates the nurses on it. And it turns out that the vast majority can't tell. They can't tell. Okay? So you can go real life, you can go more lab-based. Now, there is a slight difference. People working with kids, it's tempting, we've not followed it up, but it might be, does working with kids, and you're now having something above the 0.5 level, and the differences between this might be significant, whatever that would mean. So we have some of that. Okay, so we were asking people on the basis of their impression of the child. We weren't asking them to look at different features on the face, so it wasn't facial coding. We simply said, look at it and tell us your opinion, as you would, is that person lying or not? So we now started to actually measure these behaviors, which require going frame by frame and gathering all of these kinds of data. And the outcome was there's no difference between the liars and the truth tellers in these behavioral codes. So it doesn't exist there. In fact, the truth tellers appear to be more anxious. There's, in both stare condition, when the experimenter just looks, and in the response, the truth tellers show more of these nonverbal behaviors. That is, they're showing more guilt-like behaviors, which is just the reverse. It's certainly not in any direction. So, to summarize some of this, children lie after transgression. They are not caught above chance levels by adults. Those who work with children do somewhat better. But indeed, the detection, this complex behavior. Now, we haven't done it against, let's say, a theory of mind or some other kind of cognitive variable. Would that impact on the facial expression? But those are work to be done, work in progress. There may be some more cognitive driven, because we do know in the lie literature, the simpler the lie, the easier it is to not detect it. So if you're going to lie, you just change one small piece in an already scripted story. I went to the meeting, and after the meeting, we all went out and we all had some beer, and then we went back to the room. And you leave out some intermediate things that occur which make the lie easier. So that's known in the lie literature. The more complicated, the more you have to remember, did I say that? Did I say that? The more hesitant and the more obvious it becomes. So that's just the rule about it. Yeah.
A quick question about that. So when you were doing the ratings, were there some children that the raters actually were fooled more? Because presumably there were some hit rates. I'm just wondering if you could separate the ones that actually
we're gonna
Good and
separate
bad
them in a way.
Okay.
Okay, so if I asked in the audience, you can participate if you will, how many of you think you're good liars? Come on, you can own it. We're saying it's good. This is a good thing. Good thing. Good, raise your hand for a good thing. Okay. It turns out that people who think they're good liars are good liars. Because at the moment that if you think you're a bad liar, and now you're up against making a lie, well, you're in trouble. So the treatment is, in fact, to teach you how to lie. I once said this, and some reporter or something quoted, and in one of the magazines that appeared, Dr. Lewis said, it's good to teach your children how to lie. So you have to be careful. But so we went to this question. What, if any, differentiates good and bad liars and truth tellers? Why do some people think they're good liars? Okay, so we took all these kids. I said the subject pool is 58. And we said, let's find the good liars. That is, okay. The good liars, we took the extremes of the good liars and the bad liars. And we looked at them. We said, we based it on what the adults said. If the adult said, oh, this kid for sure didn't lie, they would go into the good liar. And if a majority of the people said, this kid has lied, then it would go in there. And then we could go back and look at their behavior. And you can't find any difference, okay? The point being that lying is a good thing to do. Okay. So what else do we know about lying? I'm just going to do this and then we can probably stop. Well, there's an unpublished study that has these are in Italian, have 4-year-old children who masked their emotions in the disappointing gift task were more likely to be chosen by other children to be their play dates. So there's some evidence that not telling it as it is, in fact, makes you more friends than telling it as it is. Now, lying to avoid punishment has now been found in Japanese, West African, and Chinese children beside American children. So, these findings are very, very similar. So it's not like this is a cultural artifact. This is what we're finding. As I said, it's related to a theory of mind. Lying is related to the neocortex size in primates. By the way, in the 2 papers I suggested, the Scientific American, I've gone through all of these. So there is argument made by many, in fact, that lying is, in fact, potentially good for mental health. That is, looking through rose-colored glasses, being optimistic rather than pessimistic. It grows out of the opposite idea, that is, letting it all out, that is authenticity, were argued by the psychoanalysts who said repression, the non-availability, was what caused the problem, the illness. So you have to let it out, you know. You really have to think about really wanting to sleep with your mother or your father or whatever. And once you get that out, then it will be gone. So it's, we're suggesting that the data support the opposite, namely people who are optimistic. And we recognize that. There are people who go on a vacation and make a good story out of their catastrophe. And there are people who, let's say, with disastrous experience equal, who complain and find it awful. So a whole attitude about how you see, I think lying is related to creativity. I think it's related to poetry. I think it's related to self-deception. All these things have components of us in them, which I think are terribly important. And there is some data related to creativity, lying as well. And there are just some of the references to it. So, I've gone on. Let me stop. I'm going to stop here. Okay. So I'm going to end by leaving you with a question to tell me. Why, if lying and deception have virtue, why are they considered immoral? Okay? I think that's an intellectual challenge. And I'll give you a hint of how I would answer it. Actually, I have a paper if anyone's interested. And it starts with what I first said, that Trump gets lying a bad rap. So, thank you.
You want to field your own questions? Or